Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Stephanie. I am the Community Program Coordinator at the Riverwood Conservancy. And today, I've been waiting to do this presentation for a while now. I'm pretty excited. We are going to be talking about the Canada jay, which is super exciting. I have a poll that I'm just going to launch. And if you could just answer this question, and this is only for our Zoom viewers, so I apologize if you're watching on Facebook, but have you ever seen a Canada jay is the question. There's yes in Ontario, yes somewhere else, no, but I know of them. Sorry, there's a spelling error there, and no, what are they? So if you could just answer that poll question for me, that would be awesome. And I see actually about 40% of people that are joining today actually have seen a Canada jay in Ontario, which is pretty awesome. Then we have about 27% that saw it somewhere else. So if you have seen it elsewhere in Canada, please feel free to write in the comments. That'd be really cool to know where you saw the Canada jay. And then we have about 21% of them that haven't seen a Canada jay, but you know of them. And I'll be talking a little bit about where you can actually find a Canada jay and see it. And then about 8% that have never even heard of Canada jay, which I find the most exciting to see that people might not even know or heard or seen this bird before, and to learn a little bit more about it. And then I see Jen in the comments says she saw them at Rocky Mountains. Shelly said lots in Alberta. Steve also said out west, BC and Alberta. Yeah, so that's a common place that you'll find them as well. Very cool. Let me see, is there more comments? Awesome. Oh, all over the place. It's awesome to see where everyone's seen them from. And if you're watching on Facebook, you can comment down below where you've seen them as well. I'm sure people that are watching on Facebook would be interested in seeing where you guys have found them too. But it looks like the majority have seen the Canada jay and seen it in Ontario, which is awesome. So I will share those results with you so that you can see. And I'm just going to close that. So before we get into the presentation today, I just want to mention that all of our events are now up for the month of December. So tomorrow we actually have a beginner birdwatching program. You may have seen it actually is completely full at this time, but we do have another one coming up on Monday. I apologize, I'm looking here and here. I have two monitors on me, so I'm looking at the presentation over here. We do have one coming up on Monday at 9 a.m. that still has spaces available. And then anything in yellow is virtual webinars. So we have photographic journey of Ontario parks, which is with Jason George. Super exciting. Jason actually has his photos up in Algonquin Park's visitor center right now. We also have a forest bathing program on at 8 a.m. on Wednesday. I'm just getting my laser pointer out. We also have nature trivia night that you can sign up for. We have a couple winter wildlife walks, which are going to incorporate hot chocolate and feeding chickadees, which is always a favorite of people's. We have a webinar from Elder Gary Sue on wampum and paper treaties, which is very interesting. That one's not on our website yet. It will be in the next week. It will be up on our website. And then the last program that we'll have of this calendar year is a gentle walk around Riverwood, and that is with our volunteer Trisha Kluge. So check out our website, the riverwoodconservancy.org/events, if you want to join any of the programs. And right now we have a really great gift giving opportunity that means a little bit more than materialistic things during the holidays. So you can check out our website for our gift guide. So we have several eco-friendly gifts that support our conservation and education work at Riverwood. So the first one being you can protect natural spaces and wildlife habitats, so supporting our conservation and restoration work. You can make nature more accessible by supporting our enabling garden work and supplies that are needed. You can propagate our pollinator gardens by offering food and habitat for pollinators in our new pollinator garden that we have. You can expand our new veggie garden, which goes to local community food banks. And you can also give a kid a chance to get some fresh air and natural education outdoors through our Education Naturally program. So all of these are donations that you would make, and then you would be able to get kind of a card that says that you bought this gift, and you can give it to your friends and family as well. And just means a little bit more than materialistic things. So to do that, you'd go to the riverwoodconservancy.org/gifts, and anything that is purchased from our nature gift guide before December 31st will be matched dollar for dollar by Scotts Canada up to $15,000. So you can make double the impact during this holiday season for us. So check that out. And before we start talking about our Canada Jays, I just want to mention that the Riverwood Conservancy would like to acknowledge that the land on which we operate is the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, Wendat, and Haudenosaunee nations. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this place is still home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and we are so grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this beautiful land. Just checking out, I'm opening the chat bar so I can see what you guys are saying. Okay, so let's get right into it with the bird that we will be talking about today, which is the Canada Jay. Now, the Canada Jay has many different nicknames for it. Often it's referred to as the gray jay. And I will say, I'm going to explain a little bit about the name history. I might mess up at some point and call it a gray jay. I apologize for any of you out there. I grew up learning gray jay, not Canada Jay. So sometimes it slips my mind. It's hard to kind of change up. But I will be explaining a little bit more about the history between Canada and gray jay. So one of the nicknames it has is Gray Jay. Another name that it has is called Whiskey Jack, and that actually derives from Algonquin or Cree languages. And it's a name for a mischievous, transforming spirit who likes to play tricks on people. It's this fun-loving spirit. So how to pronounce this, I might mess this up, but I'm pretty sure it's Wissahickok. Wissahickok. And this is a very, very rare occasion where actually an Indigenous name stuck in the English language. And this brings up a whole other conversation about the decolonization of bird names. Many of our bird names are named after naturalists that came to this area and settled the land. But there's not a lot of bird names that come from Indigenous groups that were here long, long before us and had these names for these birds and these animals. So that's just a whole other conversation. I really encourage you to look up some of the articles that are written about decolonization of bird names. I think it's quite fascinating and definitely respectful too. Another name that comes up is camp robber, and camp robber actually comes from the history of lumber camps here in Canada. So our Canada Jay would visit lumber camps, or they would visit kills like deer that were made by hunters. They would visit campsites from canoeists or anything in northern woods that was left behind by humans. So they would be called camp robbers because they'd often visit places that humans were camping at to look for scraps of food that we've left behind. Another nickname that comes up is meat bird. And surprisingly enough, this bird does eat meat, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on. It is very opportunistic. And so it does have a nickname of meat bird. Very interesting. And then the last nickname is Gorbies. And this comes from a Scottish origin, I believe. And the word gorb actually means glutton or gluttonous. So a lot to do with what they eat. They're very opportunistic. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later on. But Gorbies is another nickname. I wonder if you have any other nickname, please post it in the chat too, because I know there's so many. Everybody has different names for this bird. And I just see in the chat now, it says somebody joined late. This will be recorded and it will be posted for about a week, and then it'll be taken down again. And I see here, we have a lot of these in Alberta. Love these cute, mischievous birds. They are very mischievous. Okay, let's continue on. So this is going to be probably the hardest part to explain for me. I'm going to try to go through it slowly to kind of explain to you the origin of its name and the history of it, because it's very confusing and there's lots of different changes that happen along its way. So in 1831, it was actually named Canada Jay, and I believe this was when Audubon had named it the Canada Jay. I could be wrong on that. So originally it was named the Canada Jay. And then in 1947, what happened is Audubon Ornithological Society proposed that birds that have more than 2 different subspecies should have a second common name. So within the Canada Jay, there was actually 9 subspecies recognized. And basically a subspecies is all of these subspecies are the same species, but they have something that makes them variable from each other or different. It could be coloration, it could be behaviors, it could be where they are, what region they live in, things they eat. So something that in their genes that makes them slightly different. They're the same species, but there's differences between those subspecies. So what Audubon had said is that with all of these subspecies, there should be a way that we can determine by common name what we're referring to. So they suggested that there should be a second common name after the region where that subspecies is found in. So therefore, for Canada jays that are found in Alaska, that subspecies would be called Alaskan Canada jay. For subspecies of Canada jay that's found in Alberta, that subspecies would be called Alberta Canada jay, and so on for every region that those subspecies is found in. But that got really, really confusing. And so they said, you know what, this doesn't really make sense. Alaskan Canada jay, Alaska's not in Canada. Oregon Canada jay, not in Canada. Doesn't really make sense. And the regions are very confusing. How am I supposed to know? Is it in Canada? Is it in the States? So what they did is they changed the name to gray jay so that their second name would make more sense. Alaskan gray jay, Alberta gray jay, Oregon gray jay, so on and so forth for all 9 of those subspecies. So their common name would make more sense basically to what region you'd find them in. Then in 1954, Audubon said, scrap that idea. That's just too confusing. The second names were actually then only given to the Latin names. So many of you may know we have common names, which we say in the English language, such as Canada jay. And then we have Latin names that are a little bit more specific, and they will tell you exactly what that subspecies that you're referring to is as well. So what happened is all 9 of those subspecies, they no longer had a second common name. They were just, all of them were called gray jays. They would have a second Latin name. So their Latin name for gray jay is Perisaurus canadensis. I might be messing that up. So all of them were called Perisaurus canadensis, but then they would have another name that would distinguish what that subspecies is, if that makes sense. And then Audubon said, well, we can go forward and rename them Canada jay. But nothing really came of it. What happened is in 1957, a couple of years down the road, after they scrapped that whole idea, is that Audubon actually published a checklist. And in that checklist, they didn't change it back from gray jay to Canada jay. They just left it as gray jay. So nothing came of that naming of it back to Canada jay. And actually, that's why I say I'll mess up, because in my own book, sorry, you can't really see here, I have the Sibley's book from, I think, 2016, this one was published. And in it, oh, you can't really see that. Anyways, in it, it says gray jay. So up until 2018, when it was actually changed back to Canada jay again. So there's a long history of this bird and the naming of it. So in 2018, after digging into this long history, researchers Dan Strickland and Ryan Norris, which I'll be talking a little bit later on about them, they went to Washington to actually fight for the name to be back to Canada jay. And today it is named Canada jay. So that's the long history of its name and why you may hear people calling it all sorts of different names. A lot of nicknames and a lot of renaming happening already. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Please put them in the chat bar or the Q&A section, and I'll try to get to them throughout the presentation, and if not, at the very end too. And in 2016, I did see someone comment this in the chat. This little guy was actually voted by Canadians to be the national bird of Canada. And the reason being, as you can see in this image here of Canada, this gray splotch is the range of the Canada jay. So it can be found actually in all 13 provinces and territories in Canada, everywhere. That being said, the Canadian government actually made it clear that they were not interested in having another national animal. So it is not officially our national bird. Right now, Canada jay is only voted in as a recommendation. It was never officially approved by the Canadian government. So unfortunately, at this time, it is not our national bird, just a recommendation among birders. Another reason, actually, when this whole thing came up in 2016, that this bird was going to be our national bird, there was a lot of people that were upset. And this is the reason why I asked the question at the very start of this presentation. A lot of people were upset because, as you see in this image here, about 50% of all Canadians live below this red line, 50%. So a lot of our population lives below this red line. And if we look back at the distribution or the range of the gray jay, the Canada jay, I told you I'd mess up. You can see that it's really far north. There are northern species. So a lot of our population in Canada have never even seen a Canada jay, let alone know what it is. And that's why I asked a lot of you if you've ever seen one or even heard of them. And we saw that nearly 10% of people watching this webinar right now haven't even heard of a Canada jay before. So that's what made a lot of people upset, saying, well, I've never seen it. Why should it represent Canada? That being because it really is, the range is all throughout Canada and just not in where the place of where we're most populated. I'm wondering, does anyone know what our national animal is? This is just a quick quiz for you all. Anyone know our national animal? I'm gonna look in the chat here. I see people saying beaver. Awesome. So yes, our national animal is the beaver. And this is from the start of the creation of Canada, basically. Beaver trade was a huge source of income for many people. It was a style icon. People used to wear big hats of beaver pelt, basically. That's what made it the national animal, because it was such a big trade income. Anyone know our Ontario provincial flower or bird? This is a little bit harder. We do have a provincial bird. We do not have a national bird. So I see Pat says trillium, Lisa says trillium. Anybody know the bird though? So provincial flower is correct, white trillium. Anyone want to take a guess at what our bird is? Eric says chickadee. Canada geese, a common loon, blue jay, cardinal, all good guesses. A few of you got it. It is a loon. So our provincial bird is actually a loon. A lot of people actually suggested for the national bird to be the loon, but as it's already our provincial bird, that'd be kind of confusing if we had the same national bird as provincial bird. So our provincial bird is the common loon. And of course, our provincial flower is the white trillium. But I think blue jay or cardinal would be a cool provincial bird too. Now to just cover some of the classifications of our Canada jay, to start, it is in the kingdom Animalia. That's the same as us. All other animals are in this kingdom. It's in phylum Chordata, and Chordata basically is for animals that have a notochord. And a notochord, you don't need to remember this, but a notochord is this structure. It's like a cartilage skeletal structure that supports bodies when they're in embryo, or like very little babies, embryos. So all animals that are within chordata have this cartilage structure when we are embryos. So humans are in this, aquatic animals, fish, a lot of mammals, I don't know what else, birds, some reptiles, amphibians, things like that. And then the class is aves, which many of you may know means birds. Order is passeriforms. So passeriforms are perching birds. So I have an image, I think, here. So perching birds have 3 toes that go forward and then 1 toe that goes back. And that allows them to sit on branches and perch. So passeriforms is perching birds. Any bird that has this kind of toe structure usually falls under this order. Now, if you've ever seen a woodpecker, they have 2 toes that go forward and 2 toes that go back, and that actually allows them to walk a little bit differently than our perching birds. They can actually climb up the side of trees. They can kind of go upside down, hang upside down from branches, things like that. So that order is specific to their feet structure, and a lot of classification of birds is due to their beaks and their feet structure as well. The family is in Corvidae, and Corvidae includes things like crows, ravens, jays, magpies, nutcrackers, jackdaws, things like that. And just going to check 1 second. Can everyone see my screen okay still? I'm just wondering if everyone can just say, somebody can just say yes in the chat. It seems like it. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone. Sorry. And then the genus is Perisaurus. Don't know if I'm saying that correctly again, but Perisaurus is the genus, and the specific species of Canada jay is called the Perisaurus canadensis. So that is a little bit of the classification. Other jays that can actually be found in Canada, the blue jay, it is pretty widespread, mostly in Southern Ontario. So a lot of Canadians are aware of the blue jay, and that's because, once again, that red line, a lot of our blue jays live under that red line where 50% of our population lives. So there's lots of blue jays that live in this area. But really, they're not too far north of here, much more. They're more of a southern Canadian species and into the United States as well. The other one here, does anyone know what this kind of jay is? You can post that in the chat if you know. Anyone know? Oh, we're so quick. Everyone was ready for that one. So this is a Steller's jay, which can really only be found out west and into the United States as well. But Alberta, BC, those are places that you can find the Steller's jay. And it is such a beautiful bird. It looks quite common to the blue jay with that mohawky look to its head too. Now, our Canada jays, they live in northern forests, once again, higher than that population line. So they live in northern parts of Canada. Boreal, which means northern, they live in boreal habitats, alpine habitats, things like that. So they're very suited for colder climates. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about their behaviors, but their actual body characteristics, they're really built for northern climates. They are so fluffy. I find them very adorable. Their feathers are even all over their beak, and they cover their nostrils. There's lots of fluffy down feathers in them. They're very round, and in the cold winter months, you'll actually see them puff up all their feathers, and then they'll kind of cover their legs and their feet to stay more warm in a winter storm as well. So they are built for northern climates. Now, something very interesting about our Canada jays is that they are pretty opportunistic eaters. They eat just about anything. They eat spiders, flying insects, insects that are in grasslands, insects that are even in water. They'll wade into water and grab insects off the surfaces of the water. They'll eat fruits, berries, seeds, nuts. They'll even eat shreds of meat that are off of kills made by other mammals. So if a coyote was to kill or I guess more relevant to Canada jays, if a wolf was to kill a deer, for example, our Canada jays would go in and eat kind of any of that meat that's left over that the wolf hadn't consumed. And how it does that, it doesn't really have a beak for tearing. It will grab onto a piece of meat and it will kind of twist and pull. It does a twisting and pulling method to actually get pieces of meat off of a carcass, because it doesn't have a very sharp beak. It's pretty surprising that they eat meat in general. They will also eat mushrooms or fungi off the forest floor, and they'll even eat eggs or baby birds from other animals' nests or other birds' nests, like chickadees' nests, nuthatches' nests, things like that too, which is just very surprising when people hear that for the first time. So they're very, very opportunistic, but they kind of have to be because they live in climates that are so, so cold and really desolate during certain months of the year. Now, Canada jays are called scatter hoarders. And basically what this means is that they cache thousands and thousands of these food items during the summer and in the fall and even into early winter. And they'll cache all of these food places all over their territory, all over the forest. And basically this allows them to eat or go back to these places, find these food sources in the winter time, and allows them to actually live in the winter in very cold climates. So you think about a squirrel or even chickadees do this as well. They cache or they stash their food in certain places so that they can survive cold winters. Now, our Canada jays do this a little bit more extensively. They put what they do is they get a food source, so say like a seed or a certain type of insect, and they'll actually manipulate it in their mouth. And it forms kind of like a bolus of saliva, and their saliva is very, very sticky. So what they do is they form this bolus, and it's a ball of saliva, and then the food is on the inside of the saliva. And what they do is they stick these balls of saliva throughout the forest, on the side of trees, beneath bark, or under or covered by lichen. And then they'll go back to those when their food resources are really, really low in the wintertime, which is so fascinating. And they're pretty good at remembering all the different places. If you come to Riverwood, chickadees are probably the most common bird that you'll see, and they do something quite similar. Chickadees actually have a really cool technique. In the fall, what they do is they do housekeeping in their brain. So chickadees will actually get rid of any brain cells that no longer serve them any purpose, and they'll rebuild new brain cells to basically allow them to remember where all of these places they're hiding food. So if you ever come to Riverwood and you feed a chickadee from your hand, watch where it goes, because it could go to a tree and actually hide that seed behind a piece of bark, and it will remember where that caching site is, which is pretty amazing. So go back to the Canada jay. What they do is they form that little ball of saliva. They'll hide it. They will sometimes cover up their caches with lichen or even bark. And they make sure that they scatter their food all over the forest. They don't put it in one place. Some of our squirrel species, they'll put a bunch of food in one place. And what happens is if another animal is to find that stashing site, they'll just eat all of your food and you'll be out of food for a long period of time. Our Canada jays, they'll hide them all over the forest, all over their territory. And basically this means that if a squirrel, for example, was to find one of their hidden foods, it wouldn't be like a jackpot. They'd find one of them, but they wouldn't know where to look next for more of their food sources. So it's pretty amazing what they do. Now, this is actually one of the reasons why the Canada jay gets so many of its names, because it's so opportunistic. It really is always on the search for food. And for hundreds of years, these Canada jays have followed humans through the forest, picking up after them and even taking a snack straight from their hand. So you can actually hand feed these birds. They have been following people through northern forests for a long, long time. And now they associate humans with food. Well, a lot of them, not everywhere in Canada, but a lot of them do associate humans with food, and thus they'll come to your hand for a quick and easy snack. Now, this is very controversial. I understand that, feeding animals from food, but I found a really good article by Audubon. It actually suggests when to feed and not to feed birds and what is best for the animal. And I think that's really important whenever you're going to be feeding a bird, even on a bird feeder. I just want to say, feeding animals like foxes, coyotes, deer, big no-no. Do not ever do that. In no case do I support that kind of thing. It's a little bit different, and I'll be explaining that a little bit in a second. So number one, is that bird species at risk? With our Canada jay, they are in low concern. In some areas, it's a little bit, their populations are struggling more, which I'll be talking more about, but that's due to climate change. At Riverwood, chickadee feeding, chickadees are also low concern, and there's many of them. Is the food appropriate and safely provided? So is that a natural food source? Are you feeding them bread, for example, which is super, super bad for birds? Many of us didn't know that growing up, though, that bread is bad for birds, but it is horrible for birds. So make sure that you're feeding it natural food sources that they could find. And then no scattering of leftover food on the ground. A lot of people didn't know this, but when we say safely provided, if we were to have a whole bag of bread and then we were done, or a whole bag of seed even, and we were done feeding that bird, and we say, oh, I'm just going to dump it on the ground, that can actually get really moldy and gross. It can pollute our waterways to have such an influx of one kind of seed that maybe the birds aren't going to completely eat. It can pollute our waterways, and it also can get really gross. And what happens is other animals may come and eat it and then get very sick from that food too. So making sure the food is natural and that it actually is safely provided for the animal, just a couple seeds, not a whole bag of seeds. And number three, is feeding the bird going to change its behavioral in harmful ways, both to the bird and to humans as well? So I know that there's been people that have fed owls before and close to roads, which is so horrible, because now those owls are going to associate food with these roadways. And what happens is they unfortunately get hit by cars. Is that bird going to opt out of migration? With gray jays and chickadees, they do not migrate. But for migratory bird species, is it going to opt out of migration if there's more food resources available from your hand or from your bird feeder? And the last thing that I really want to point out too is their behavior going to deter people from enjoying birds and even resenting them? So one example I have of that is if you go to a beach where humans leave food all over the place, and there's lots of gulls, and even on the streets where people leave food, there's lots of pigeons. And what happens is those gulls and those pigeons associate people with food, and then they will start bugging people, walking right up to them, being very, they're just very, I don't know what the word I'm looking for right now, but they're annoying in some sense, and it deters people from actually enjoying birds. You've heard people talk about gulls and pigeons, and a lot of people don't like them for this very reason, that they just will flock you to try and get food. So is that feeding going to cause that? So if you go to the beach and you feed a gull, is it going to make people dislike that bird because you're feeding it more? And maybe they won't care about their conservation or the status of them as well. So these are just a couple things that we need to consider when we choose to feed our birds. I'm just going to look back in the chat here because I see lots coming in. What type of chickadees do you have in your region in Canada? In our region, we have black-capped chickadee, just like what you said in the US. We also, farther north into Algonquin Park, we have boreal chickadees. They're a little bit more rare to find, but we do have those as well. Oh, and Steve actually answered, we also have mountain and chestnut back. Very cool. Okay, great comments. Thank you, everyone. And yes, gulls get like that on Florida beaches. Yes, many beaches. You go to even Wasaga Beach and they're like that too. And a lot of people don't like them because of that. So here are just some tips and reasons to just think of these 3 tips next time you go to feed a bird. Now, one thing that's been closely researched now is the effect that climate change is having on these northern birds. And specifically with warmer weather, this means that many of their food caches are spoiling before they can be used. So if you think about it like a refrigerator that has been broken, eventually, if it does not get fixed, all of your food will spoil. Or another example is being, if you had a bunch of food in your fridge and then your fridge would turn off for a day, you would keep that fridge closed to try to preserve as much of the cold as you can, but eventually your food is going to spoil. And then your fridge kicks back in again the next day. Well, you're going to restock that fridge. But what happens is it's going to spoil again. And eventually you'll be like, out of food because all of it has spoiled. And this is what's happening to our Canada jays, especially in their more southern region. We're seeing more warmer winters right now, especially this year is a great example of that. Our fall, and even now we're in December, it's been quite warm outside, very mild, and that's really not great for a lot of our bird species that stick around here all winter long in our resident species. So there has been research done in Algonquin Park, lots of research done, which I'll talk about in a moment, but they're actually finding that about 50% of the territories that used to be occupied by Canada jays are now no longer occupied. And they're thinking this is due to climate change because all of their food that they're caching in the fall is spoiling. And then when you get in the really deep winter in Algonquin Park, January, February, and even into March, when there's lots of snow and there's zero resources, that means they're out of food if their food has spoiled. So climate change is really impacting the species, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do if they move further north or if they adapt and figure out a different way. It's very interesting research that they're doing right now. Now, probably the most important thing about those caching sites and why they need so many food caching sites is because they actually raise their young when resources are extremely low. They raise them in the prime or the peak of winter time. So what happens is the male will choose a specific site and they will both work on making that nest throughout February. And their nest is very interesting. They build their nest out of spruce, tamarack twigs. A very important thing that they use is cocoons, actually. If you've ever seen the cocoons from tent caterpillars up in the trees, the Canada jays will collect all of those cocoons and they'll use it kind of as a warm bedding in the wintertime. They'll also use bark and lichen, and you can also see them finding or collecting feathers and fur off of those carcasses that I was talking about earlier. So they not only will go to like deer kills by coyotes or wolves to eat the meat, but they'll also collect the fur off things, other animals like squirrels that have been killed or other birds that have been killed by hawks. They'll collect those things and they'll use it as a warm insulator in their nest. And then they lay their eggs in about mid to late March. And those eggs will actually hatch in mid-April, so very, very early in the season. And our Canada jays, they will only do one brood a season of 2 to 5 eggs. It's more the lower number, but there can be 2 to 5 eggs within that nest, and just once a season. So they only have one chance that whole year to have a nest and have a brood of offspring. So very interesting. And the incubation of those eggs is about 19 days as well. So when those eggs hatch, these little nestlings look a little bit like this, and they're very pink. They look like little pinkies. At the start, they have almost no feathers. These feathers are really not doing anything as insulation. So the female actually stays on the nest all day long and will keep her babies warm, while as the male will go out and find those different caching sites and actually collect the food, come and feed the female and the babies. And so he will be very, very busy throughout the forest, collecting all of those caching sites and making sure that they have enough food to stay warm throughout the winter time, because all of those foods that they're eating, that will help them stay warm. And I want to say a big shout out. These are all photos. Well, the ones put down here are from Dan Strickland, who is the researcher of Canada jays one of the researchers of Canada jays up in Algonquin Park. So he put these on Wikimedia. So I appreciate the use of these photos because they're very, very interesting as well. Now, when the baby Canada jays, they get a little bit larger, they have more feathers on them to stay warm, then the female will no longer need to stay on them all the time. Both the female and the male will go out into the forest and they will collect those caching sites or any food that's available during that time as well. And they'll both be co-feeding their offspring. The one issue here is that what happens, and you can even see all these feathers here too, to keep them warm, to keep the babies warm too. But what happens is when both the male and the female are gone looking for food for their offspring, something that can happen is that a red squirrel or another kind of species of squirrel can actually find this nest and they may potentially eat the offspring as well. So it's a very difficult time for their babies at this point. They're very fragile and they are prone to predation at this time because they don't have the protection of their parents 24/7 basically. And once these the offspring grow up and they fledge the nest or they leave the nest, they stay together as a family unit. And this is what one of them looks like. This is a juvenile Canada jay. It's kind of this gray sooty color is what they call it. And their first molt will be in about July, where after that first molt, they'll look almost identical to their parents. Now, after the siblings have fledged the nest, they'll stay together, like I said, and what will happen in about 6 weeks is that those siblings will start kind of a sibling rivalry where they'll start to actually fight each other to maintain territory. So what happens is only one of the siblings out of that whole brood will actually be able to remain with the parents. All the other siblings will be kicked out of the territory and have to fend for themselves. And usually the dominant male sibling is the one that hangs out with the parents. So say there was 3 or 4 offspring that came of that nest, 3 of them would be kicked out and that one would stay with the parents for a whole year into summer, fall, and even into the next winter. And they'll be able to actually go out and search for another territory nearby, but also be able to come back to their parents' safe haven, their parents' territory, and use their parents' food as well. So one offspring is definitely favored. The other offspring that are kind of kicked out into the world, they have to quickly go find nearby locations that they can make their territory. This could be if a male and female Canada jay lost all of their offspring from that season, you will sometimes see that a juvenile from another Canada jay can actually move into that territory, and it's kind of like an adoption. They'll say, okay, you can hang out in this territory and eat some of the food resources, but after that, find your own kind of territory. So they're kind of finding some sort of shelter until they find their own territory too. But unfortunately, a lot of those juveniles that are kicked out, a lot of them actually end up dying. Actually, the majority of them end up dying, which is really, really unfortunate. And I think there's a lot of research being done on why that would be, why you would kick out some of your genes, right? Those birds have their genes in them. So it's very interesting. Now, Canada jays will stay together for their whole entire life, and they maintain one single territory their whole life too. So they never move around, they don't migrate. That being said, if one of the Canada jays ends up dying, either female or male, there is always another Canada jay that is also looking for a new mate or territory and will move in and replace that Canada jay. So it's not as romantic as we make it out to be. They will hold their territory, and what happens is they will migrate, and that actually results in them living a really, really long time. Migration is a huge pressure for a lot of our birds, especially birds like warblers that are super small, or hummingbirds that are very, very small as well. You think about migrating hundreds, thousands of kilometers to a new location for resources, you're going to run into some obstacles, lots and lots of obstacles, and especially with more development happening in everywhere globally. There's lots of development happening. That's putting a lot of pressure on our migratory species. They're either hitting windows or they can't find food resources because what used to be there, like a natural forest or a field ecosystem, now is replaced by maybe a subdivision, and maybe they came back there year after year and now they don't know where the food resources are, or they can't stop over in that place, or their waterways. There's so many things that impact migratory species. So with Canada jays, they're really lucky. They don't migrate. They stay in one place their whole life. And so they live much longer. They actually average about 8 years and can live up to 15 plus years, which is crazy. That's like more than a dog would live. So very, very interesting. Now, one way to tell the difference between male and female, very difficult. The males tend to be slightly larger, and the females tend to be slightly smaller. But that being said, you see this pair here, you really can't tell, and they're right beside each other. This one maybe could be the male, but it's just a little bit floofed up more. And I'm just looking at the chat here. And Steve said, part of the reasoning is to ensure the strongest of the young survive. So referring to why they would kick out the young. Very true. Ensuring you're putting a lot more energy into protecting one of the individuals to ensure that one does survive, instead of spreading out your resources and your energy among 4, where maybe you'll lose all of them because you aren't devoting as much attention to that one. Very, very good comment as well. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the research that's being done in Algonquin Provincial Park. If you've never been there, it's about 3 hours from Toronto. It is one of the coolest provincial parks, I would say. It is very, very beautiful and natural, which is just lovely. But a lot of research is being done up there, and a specific research on the Canada jays along the Highway 60 corridor. And actually, what they do is they'll band these individuals, and banding occurs with a lot of species of birds. Point Pelee, for example, also bans birds down there, and they band, I think, mostly migratory species. I could be wrong, but what you do is you put these little colored bands on birds, and that's how you actually identify the individuals. And this is to actually understand the breeding success and to follow each jay throughout the years, how long it survives, how many young it has, if they're changing, where their territory is, where their caching sites are, all these different things. So what they do is they actually have acronyms for their colored bands. So this individual would be called Powell Boger. So how they determine this is pink, so P, over, O, white, W, left leg, L, so Powell, P-O-W-L, and then blue, B, over, O, green, G, right leg, right, B-O-G-R, Powell Boger. So that's what this individual would be called. Sorry, that was a lot of thinking on a Friday afternoon. So that's actually how the researchers will identify the specific species that they're seeing. They'll have their binoculars out, they'll be viewing the Canada jay, and they can actually document where they saw the Canada jay and what it's doing, and if anything has changed. They'll even catch these Canada jays too and measure them, weigh them, things like that too. So we have some of the best Canada Jay research happening in Ontario out of Algonquin Park. It started back in the 1960s with Russ Rutter. Now, currently, Dan Strickland, who is a retired chief park naturalist, who took over the study in 1970s and recently retired, so is taking on a lot of this research too. And then also Ryan Norris, who runs a lab out of University of Guelph. And he started up research in 2009. So Dan Strickland and Ryan Norris are working closely together, and other PhD students as well, on studying the populations of Canada jays, specifically in Algonquin Park. And Algonquin is kind of the closest range where you can actually see our Canada jays from Toronto anyways. That's pretty much the most southernmost point that you can actually find and see the Canada jays. And over the past 20 to 30 years, they've actually seen a really dramatic decline of about 50%, which I think I said a little bit earlier on, of the jays within Algonquin. And this is likely due, very much so due to climate change. So we talked about the caching sites spoiling quicker. And so these birds really rely on a cold winter. So whether that means that their offspring are dying, or the pair themselves are dying, or they're moving further north so that they have more of these cold climates, it's very difficult. So they're doing a lot of research on that right now. So what can you do? Other than the bigger conversation of preventing climate change, which is currently happening. Climate change is happening as we speak right now, but that is a large conversation. What can you do specifically to support Canada jays and other bird species? First thing I would say is citizen science. Citizen science records are so important to researchers now. In the past, scientists had to go out into a field on their own, or maybe with one other person, and have to follow all of these different populations, all of these different individuals throughout a forest, and it'd be very difficult for them. Now, thanks to many citizen science projects, scientists are getting help from citizens. So just by going for a walk and recording the birds that you hear or see on eBird. So if you're a birder, eBird is one of the greatest citizen science projects that you can contribute to, and it helps us understand the populations that are changing and fluctuating with different climates, different habitats, development in their habitats as well. Another really great app, which I've talked a lot about, is iNaturalist. And actually we have another BioBlitz coming up from April to May, which I really hope you check it out on our website. It's called TRC Spring BioBlitz 2022, and we'll be giving away great prizes for that as well. But iNaturalist is a great way to record all sorts of different species. It's not specific to birds. You can do plants, mammals, reptiles, amphibians. You can record tracks, sounds, feathers. Just the other day at Riverwood, I found a feather and I uploaded it to iNaturalist, and everyone from the community was like, that is a great horned owl feather. So it's pretty cool because we can identify what kind of species are in this area. So citizen science is one great way to help out. And then another great way to help out is by supporting parks and conservation areas. That includes Algonquin Park, Algonquin Provincial Park. That includes Riverwood, the Riverwood Conservancy, like ourselves, who we're fighting to protect these lands and hoping that people will get some great education out of these protected lands as well. So by donating to provincial parks, national parks, conservation areas, local conservation areas, or parks that are nearby you, that is super helpful for protecting bird species, protecting habitat, food resources, shelter, all sorts of things for our bird species as well. And also fighting for government legislation and protection of these lands, and that support wildlife research project. That's really important, getting support for research as well. And I'm sure Canada Jay research will continue on for many years from Algonquin Wildlife Research Station too. So that is all for me. I can't believe, I'm just looking at the time right now. I can't believe it's been an hour. But I will take some comments and questions now. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the comment section or the Q&A section as well, and we will get to that right now. And please, if you have any further questions and you have to leave right now, please email me at stephanie.keeler@the riverwoodconservancy.org. And please come out to any events too, and come out and see us too. We'd be happy to have you out here. So I'm just going to take some questions. So Robin asked in the Q&A, what predators do Canada or gray jay have? That's a great question. Hawks are probably the number one. As offspring, though, anything that really climbs in a tree and eats baby birds is a big one. So red squirrels are one that will actually eat the baby birds too. So predators for offspring, small mammals, things like that. For adults, it'd be hawks mostly. And thank you everyone for your comments in the comment section. I'm hoping that you enjoyed. Thank you so much for joining as well. Awesome. Okay, another question that came in from Annika. Do you know if there's any research into the mortality rates of the nestlings if one of the parents die? Are the father able to incubate the young if they're still young enough to require it? And can one parent gather enough food on their own? That's a really, really great question, and I do not have the answer for you. That's an awesome question. I would suggest looking into some of Dan Strickland and Ryan Norris research. They have been doing research for like 40 plus years, not Ryan Norris, but the whole research station in general has been doing a lot of research. So I'd look into that. I'm sure there is a scenario where maybe the female was eaten by a hawk or something like that. I'm sure there's a scenario, and I am curious what would happen. And so you guys know as well, it is recorded and will be posted and will be available for about a week after today as well. One of the questions, why is Toronto baseball team named for a bird that is ubiquitous across North America instead of a bird that is almost uniquely Canadian? That's a really great question, Eric. I do not know, so I'm sure you're referring to the Toronto Blue Jays. One thing I would say is that there's tons of Blue Jays in Toronto. So it's a species that's very prominent in Toronto specifically. I think that's our only baseball team though, so I understand why you would say, why aren't there kind of a uniquely Canadian Toronto Canada Jays or something like that? But it's the same thing like the Baltimore Orioles are named after the Baltimore Oriole, the bird that it occurs kind of in that area too. But that's a great question. And I'm actually just going to stop sharing screen so that I can look on Facebook and see if there's any comments on Facebook as well for our Facebook viewers, because I know I've kind of ignored you. I apologize. No comments, no questions from our Facebook users. That is okay. Maybe that means I did a great job and there's just no questions that people have. So I want to thank everyone for joining again. Please check out our website for events and our nature gift guide as well if you want to support us during the holidays and want to give a really cool gift to your friends and family. And thanks so much for all of your engagement today. It's been wonderful chatting with you all. And hopefully I will see you on site at Riverwood in the future. And if not, at another virtual event for those of you that are nowhere nearby us. Have a great holiday, everyone, and Happy New Year. And we'll see you soon. Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.